The badge trembled in Sergeant Daniel Mercer's hand as Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace stood in full military dress uniform, her voice cutting through the packed courtroom. "You thought your badge made you untouchable. You were wrong." The prosecutor's evidence screen flickered to life dashcam footage that would destroy a 20-year career in minutes. But this wasn't where it started. No, this began on a rain-soaked Ohio highway where one man's arrogance met its match. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment your city below. I want to know how far this tale of justice travels. The rain hammered against the windshield of Adrienne Wallace's silver Honda Accord as she navigated State Route 23, 20 miles outside Columbus. The November night pressed against her windows like a living thing thick with fog that reduced visibility to mere yards. She'd driven through worse, through sandstorms in Afghanistan that could strip paint from a Humvee, through mountain passes where one wrong turn meant a 1,000-foot drop. This was nothing. Her phone mounted on the dashboard displayed 9:47 p.m. Another 13 miles to her hotel. Tomorrow morning's conference at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base would start at 0700 sharp, and Lieutenant Colonel Wallace had never been late to anything in her 22 years of service. The blue and red lights exploded in her rearview mirror without warning. Adrienne's hands remained steady on the wheel as she checked her speedometer, 62, in a 65 zone. Her turn signal had been used at the last intersection. Her registration was current inspection sticker valid. She eased onto the shoulder gravel crunching beneath her tires. Through her side mirror, she watched the officer approach. His gait spoke volumes, the exaggerated swagger of someone who wore authority like armor rather than responsibility. Rain plastered his uniform to his broad frame, but he didn't hurry. No, he took his time letting her wait, letting her wonder. Sergeant Daniel Mercer had been having a shit night. His wife had served him divorce papers that morning, his lieutenant had passed him over for the detective promotion he'd been promised, and the rain had soaked through his supposedly waterproof boots 2 hours ago. When he'd seen the Accord change lanes perfectly legally, he knew something in him had snapped. Someone was going to have a worse night than him. He tapped on the window with his flashlight, harder than necessary. Adrienne lowered it halfway. "Good evening, officer. License and registration." No greeting, no explanation. Mercer's flashlight beam swept across her face, then into the back seat, where her military duffel bag sat. "May I ask why you pulled me over?" Adrienne's voice remained professionally neutral as she reached for her documents. "License and registration," Mercer repeated slower this time, as if she were stupid. The first mini-climax arrived as Adrienne handed over her military ID along with her driver's license. Mercer's expression shifted, annoyance flickering across his features. Military. He hated military. They always thought they were special above the law, expecting preferential treatment because they'd worn a different uniform. "Step out of the vehicle." Adrienne's eyebrows rose slightly. "Officer, I haven't been drinking. I wasn't speeding." "What's?" "I said step out of the vehicle. Now." The dash cam mounted on Adrienne's personal vehicle, a habit from too many insurance scams attempted against service members, captured everything. The timestamp glowed in the corner. 52:17. She stepped out into the rain, her civilian clothes, jeans, and a Wright State University sweatshirt immediately beginning to soak through. "Officer, I'm happy to comply, but I need to understand what violation." "Turn around. Hands on the vehicle." "This is unnecessary. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace, United States Air Force. I'm traveling to..." Mercer's hand dropped to his service weapon. "I don't care if you're the president. When I give you an order, you follow it. Turn around." The second mini-climax struck as Adrienne slowly turned, her trained muscles coiled but controlled. In Afghanistan, she'd faced down Taliban fighters. In Iraq, she'd negotiated with tribal leaders who could have had her killed with a gesture. This badge-heavy cop trying to intimidate her was almost amusing, would have been, if it weren't so deeply wrong. Spread your legs. Officer, this is... His boot kicked her feet apart. His hands began a pat-down that went from professional to invasive in seconds. His palm lingered on her hip, fingers pressing harder than any search required. Officer, you're crossing a line. Adrienne said, her voice carrying the same command tone that had coordinated airstrikes under fire. You got contraband drugs. That why you're so nervous? Mercer's breath was hot against her neck. I'm not nervous. I'm documenting. She turned her head slightly. Your badge number is 4827. The time is approximately 155 hours. This interaction is being recorded. Mercer stepped back as if she'd slapped him. You threatening me? I'm informing you of facts. Adrienne straightened, turning to face him. You've conducted a traffic stop without stating probable cause. You've ordered me from my vehicle without reasonable suspicion. You've conducted a search that borders on sexual assault. These are facts that will be reported. The third mini-climax erupted as Mercer's face twisted from red to purple. Sexual assault, you lying by. Sergeant Mercer. The name made him freeze. She'd read his nameplate in the flashlight's glare. I've memorized your badge number, your patrol car number, and I have this entire interaction on video. You have two choices. You can let me go now, and this ends with a formal complaint. Or you can escalate, and this ends with your career. Mercer's hand moved to his cuffs. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice. On what grounds? Refusing to comply with lawful orders. I complied with every order, no matter how unlawful they were. The fourth mini-climax arrived with the cold click of handcuffs. But Adrienne didn't resist. She'd learned long ago that sometimes the best way to win a war was to let your enemy think they'd won the battle. You have the right to remain silent, Mercer began, but his words carried a tremor now. Something in Adrienne's calm was unnerving him. She wasn't crying, wasn't begging, wasn't even arguing anymore. She stood in the rain like it was a gentle spring shower, her eyes locked on his with an intensity that made him want to look away. The ride to the Franklin County Sheriff's Department took 17 minutes. Adrienne counted each one, memorizing every turn, every street sign visible through the rain-streaked window. Mercer had turned off his dash cam. She'd heard the distinctive beep, but her own was still running in her abandoned car. At the station, the booking sergeant, a woman named Patricia Chen, took one look at Adrienne's military ID and shot Mercer a questioning glance. Military. She was resisting, Mercer said. I wasn't, Adrienne stated simply. Sergeant Chen, I request that my commanding officer at Wright-Patterson be notified. I also request that this interaction be fully documented, as I will be filing charges against Sergeant Mercer for unlawful detention, assault, and violation of civil rights under color of law. Chen's fingers hesitated over her keyboard. The fifth mini-climax built in the silence that followed. Danny, Chen said slowly, what exactly happened out there? She was suspicious. Changed lanes without signaling. I signaled, Adrienne said. The video will confirm that. What video? Mercer's voice cracked slightly. The dash cam in my personal vehicle. The one that recorded our entire interaction. Chen stood up. Danny, I need to talk to you, privately. But Mercer was already spiraling. Book her. I don't care what cameras she has. She resisted arrest. The booking process continued, but Chen made a call first, not to Wright-Patterson, but to the station's legal advisor. Within 10 minutes, Lieutenant Rebecca Torres arrived, her expression grim as she reviewed the arrest report. Sergeant Mercer, Torres said. It says here you pulled over Lieutenant Colonel Wallace for suspicious behavior. Can you elaborate? She was driving suspiciously. How so? Changed lanes. Illegally. It looked suspicious. Torres turned to Adrienne. Colonel Wallace, you mentioned video. Yes, My personal dashcam was running throughout the interaction. I can provide the footage immediately if someone retrieves my vehicle. The sixth mini-climax struck as Torres made a decision. Release her. Now. What? Mercer stepped forward. She's under arrest. For what? Changing lanes legally. Being military. Having a dashcam. Torres's voice could have frozen fire. Danny, what were you thinking? She threatened me. I stated facts. Adrienne corrected. I informed him that his actions were being recorded and would be reported through proper channels. Torres rubbed her temples. Colonel Wallace, on behalf of the Franklin County Sheriff's Department, I apologize. You're free to go. We'll have someone drive you back to your vehicle. I appreciate that, Lieutenant Torres, but this doesn't end here. Adrienne's voice carried no anger, just certainty. Sergeant Mercer violated my Fourth Amendment rights. He conducted an illegal stop, an illegal search, and an illegal arrest. He did so under color of law, which makes this a federal crime. Mercer laughed, but it sounded forced. Federal crime. For a traffic stop, you're delusional. Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. Adrienne recited from memory. Deprivation of rights under color of law. When someone acting under governmental authority violates another's civil rights, it becomes a federal offense. The penalties increase when the violation involves bodily injury or sexual assault. Sexual assault. Torres's eyes snapped to Mercer. Danny, what did you do? Nothing. I searched her standard procedure. His hands lingered on my hips and thighs in a manner that had nothing to do with searching for weapons. Adrienne stated. The video will show the duration and nature of the contact. The seventh mini-climax arrived as the door burst open. Chief Michael Crawford entered, his face a thundercloud. Someone had called him at home. What in the hell is going on here? Torres quickly explained. With each word, Crawford's expression darkened further. When she finished, he turned to Adrienne. Colonel Wallace, I am deeply sorry for this incident. Rest assured we will conduct a thorough investigation. I'm sure you will, Adrienne replied. As will the FBI, the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, and the Inspector General's office. I've already sent messages to my contacts in each department. You... What? When? Mercer sputtered. While I was in your patrol car. You didn't take my phone. Adrienne pulled out her iPhone, showing a series of sent messages. Military Intelligence Training Sergeant. We're taught to document everything and establish communication chains immediately. Crawford's face had gone pale. A federal investigation meant outside oversight, meant investigators crawling through every arrest Mercer had ever made, meant the entire department under scrutiny. Colonel Wallace, Crawford said carefully, perhaps we could handle this internally. First, I assure you, Sergeant Mercer will face appropriate disciplinary action. 2 weeks paid suspension, Adrienne asked. Maybe a letter in his file, no Chief Crawford. Your sergeant didn't just violate my rights. He did so believing his badge made him untouchable. How many others has he done this to? How many didn't have my training, my resources, my video evidence? The eighth mini-climax struck as Mercer made a fatal error. He lunged forward, finger pointing at Adrienne's face. You self-righteous bit! Crawford and Torres both moved, but Adrienne was faster. She simply stepped aside, letting Mercer's momentum carry him past her. He stumbled, caught himself against the wall, and turned back, fists clenched. Please, Adrienne said calmly. Assault me. Add another federal charge. Danny, stand down, Crawford roared. You're suspended. Effective immediately. Gun and badge. Now. Mercer's hands shook as he unclipped his badge. The metal caught the fluorescent lights as he set it on the desk, followed by his service weapon. This is bullshit. 20 years on the force and you're taking her side. There are no sides here, Crawford said. There's right and wrong, and you, Danny, were wrong. As Adrienne left the station driven back to her car by a deeply apologetic deputy, she thought about power. Real power didn't come from a badge or a gun. It came from knowing who you were, what you stood for, and being willing to stand up even when you stood alone. Her car sat where she'd left it, hazard lights still blinking in the rain. The dash cam's red recording light glowed steadily. She retrieved the memory card, made a backup on her laptop, and uploaded the footage to 3 different cloud services. The 9th mini-climax arrived the next morning. Adrienne stood before the conference at Wright-Patterson delivering her presentation on supply chain efficiency in forward operating bases. Her phone buzzed repeatedly messages from reporters who'd somehow heard about the incident. She ignored them all until lunch break. Then she made a single call. Marcus, it's Adrienne. Yes, that Marcus Whitman from law school, who became a civil rights attorney. I have a case for you. Marcus Whitman had made his career taking down corrupt cops. The son of a minister who'd marched with Dr. King, Marcus viewed police accountability as a calling, not just a job. When Adrienne explained what had happened, he was on a plane to Ohio within 3 hours. They met at a Starbucks near the base. Marcus, tall and lean with silver creeping into his temples, watched the dashcam footage on Adrienne's laptop. His expression never changed, but his fingers drummed against the table with increasing intensity. This is clear cut, he said when it finished. The stop was pretextual. The search was illegal. The arrest was retaliatory. But Adrienne, you need to know police unions are powerful. They'll come after you. They'll dig into your past, try to find anything to discredit you. Adrienne smiled. Let them dig. They'll find 2 Bronze Stars, a Meritorious Service Medal, and 6 Air Force Commendation Medals. They'll find perfect performance evaluations for 22 years. They'll find 3 master's degrees earned while deployed. What they won't find is a single blemish, because there aren't any. The 10th mini-climax erupted that evening when the news broke. Someone, Chen, Maybe, or Torres had leaked the story to the press. Decorated military officer arrested in questionable traffic stop, ran across the bottom of CNN. Within hours, the dashcam footage was everywhere. The video went viral with devastating speed. Badge don't mean. Bully began trending. Veterans organizations released statements. Civil rights groups demanded investigations. The Franklin County Sheriff's Department's Facebook page was flooded with outraged comments. Mercer, watching from his living room, his soon-to-be ex-wife had changed the locks, felt his world collapsing. His union representative, Pete Kowalski, sat beside him chain-smoking, despite Mercer's rental agreement prohibiting it. Danny, we can fight this, but you need to be straight with me. Is there anything else? Any other incidents that might come up? Mercer thought about the teenage girl he'd made cry during a random stop last month. The black businessman he'd held for an hour while verifying his legally owned vehicle. The Hispanic grandmother he'd cuffed for attitude when she asked why he'd pulled her over. No, he lied. Nothing. But Adrienne's team was already finding them. Marcus had hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named Sarah Chen, no relation to Patricia, who specialized in pattern analysis. Within days, she'd identified 17 other questionable stops Mercer had made, all following the same pattern. People he perceived as vulnerable stops, with weak or no probable cause escalation when questioned. The first twist came when one of those people came forward. Maria Gonzalez, the grandmother, saw the news coverage and called Marcus's office. Then came Jerome Washington, the businessman. Then Ashley Brennan, the teenager. Within a week, 7 people had joined what was becoming a class action lawsuit. Mercer's union tried to stem the bleeding. They released a statement about his years of dedicated service and his single lapse in judgment. But the dashcam footage was impossible to spin. Every news show played it. Every analyst parsed it. The moment where he kicked Adrienne's feet apart became a meme, the epitome of abuse of power. The second twist arrived when Deputy Patricia Chen came forward as a whistleblower. She brought meticulously kept records of every complaint against Mercer that had been buried, every investigation that had been stonewalled, every victim who'd been discouraged from pursuing charges. "I've been documenting this for 3 years," Chen told federal investigators. "I knew someday someone would stand up to him. I just didn't know it would be a lieutenant colonel who'd face down the Taliban." Chief Crawford tried to control the damage. He announced a comprehensive review of department policies, mandatory retraining on civil rights, and the creation of a civilian oversight board. But it was too little too late. The Department of Justice announced a pattern and practice investigation into the entire department. The third twist came from an unexpected source. Mercer's estranged wife, Linda, reached out to Adrienne's legal team. She brought recordings, years of recordings of Mercer bragging about the people he'd put in their place, the lessons he'd taught, the fear he'd instilled. "I stayed silent too long," Linda said, tears streaming down her face. "I was afraid of him. But seeing you stand up to him, Colonel Wallace, if you could do that, I could do this." The recordings were damning. Mercer laughing about making a young man wet himself during a stop. Mercer describing how he'd targeted women driving alone at night because they were easier to intimidate. Mercer explaining his philosophy. "The badge means I'm in charge. They need to learn that. All of them." Marcus built the federal case methodically. The criminal charges under 18 U.S.C. 242 were just the beginning. Civil rights violations, conspiracy charges for the department's cover-ups, RICO allegations for the systematic nature of the abuse. Each document he filed was another nail in Mercer's professional coffin. But Mercer wasn't going down without a fight. His new attorney, funded by a dark money police support organization, was Vincent Scarlucci, known for getting bad cops off on technicalities. Scarlucci's strategy was simple: destroy Adrienne Wallace. The fourth twist came when Scarlucci filed a countersuit. He alleged that Adrienne had deliberately provoked the incident, that she'd been driving erratically to bait a stop, that the entire thing was a setup to advance her military career by playing the victim. The media ate it up. Suddenly, Adrienne was being questioned not as a victim, but as a potential conspirator in her own assault. Talk radio hosts speculated about military entitlement. Online trolls flooded her social media with threats and abuse. Someone leaked her military email address, and it was bombarded with hate. But Adrienne had faced worse. She'd been one of the first women in her unit in Afghanistan. She'd endured years of subtle and not so subtle discrimination, proving herself again and again, until even the most skeptical had to admit she was exceptional. This was just another battle, and she'd learned long ago that the key to winning battles was preparation, patience, and precision. The fifth twist revealed itself during discovery. Scarlucci had demanded all of Adrienne's military records, hoping to find something, anything to use against her. What he found instead was a commendation from 3 years earlier. Adrienne had intervened when she witnessed a military police officer abusing his authority with local civilians. She'd reported him, testified against him, and seen him court-martialed. The parallel was impossible to ignore. Adrienne Wallace didn't target corrupt cops. She simply refused to tolerate abuse of power, whether the uniform was military or civilian. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks after the incident. The Franklin County Courthouse had never seen such media attention. News vans lined the street. Protesters held signs, "Badges don't mean bullies," and "Justice for Colonel Wallace," competing with "Back the Blue" and "Mercer did nothing wrong." Inside courtroom 3A, Judge Elizabeth Harper presided. A former prosecutor with a reputation for fairness and an intolerance for grandstanding, Harper had warned both sides that she would maintain order and decorum. Adrienne entered in full military dress uniform, her medals gleaming under the courtroom lights. It was a calculated choice. Marcus had wanted the visual reminder of who she was, what she'd sacrificed for her country, what she represented. Mercer entered in a gray suit that didn't quite fit right, his union-provided attorney beside him. He'd lost weight in the 3 weeks since the incident, his face gaunt, his eyes darting around the room, as if looking for allies, and finding none. The sixth twist began when the prosecution called their first witness, not Adrienne, but Deputy Patricia Chen. Her testimony was devastating. She detailed pattern after pattern of Mercer's behavior, backed up with dates, times, and case numbers. She described a culture of fear within the department, where officers who questioned Mercer faced retaliation. "Why didn't you report this earlier?" the prosecutor asked. "I did. 3 times. Each time I was told it was being handled internally. Each time nothing happened except I got worse shifts and worse assignments." Scarlucci's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned Chen's motives, suggested she was jealous of Mercer's seniority, implied she was lying to advance her own career. But Chen remained calm, answering each question with precision and documentation. The 7th twist came when Scarlucci called a surprise witness, Sergeant James Patterson, Mercer's former partner. Patterson testified that Adrienne's car had been swerving, that the stop was justified, that he'd been monitoring radio traffic and heard the whole thing. But Marcus was ready. On cross-examination, he produced radio logs showing Patterson had been off-duty that night, nowhere near the scene. He presented GPS data from Patterson's phone, showing he'd been at a bar 30 miles away. Patterson crumbled, admitting Mercer had asked him to lie, had promised to cover for him on an excessive force complaint from the previous year. Judge Harper's gavel cracked like thunder. "Sergeant Patterson, you've just admitted to perjury. You're under arrest." Court officers moved in as Patterson was led away in cuffs, the twist leaving even seasoned court reporters stunned. The 8th twist arrived with the dashcam footage. Everyone had seen clips on the news, but Marcus played the full, unedited video. 23 minutes of escalating abuse of power. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of rain on the recording and Mercer's increasingly aggressive voice. When it reached the moment where Mercer kicked Adrienne's feet apart, several people in the gallery gasped. When his hands lingered on her body during the search, a woman in the back row began crying, another of Mercer's victims reliving her own experience. Scarlucci tried to object, claiming the video was edited, enhanced, manipulated. But the prosecution had 3 independent forensic analysts confirm its authenticity. Every second was real. Every moment was true. The 9th twist came when Adrienne finally took the stand. Scarlucci had been waiting for this, ready to tear her apart, to make her lose her composure, to reveal the real woman behind the uniform. "Colonel Wallace," he began, "isn't it true that you have a history of conflict with law enforcement? I have a history of reporting abuse of authority when I witness it. Yes. You enjoy destroying careers, don't you? I enjoy protecting people from those who abuse their power to harm others. You think you're above the law because of your rank." Adrienne's response was measured, powerful. "Mr. Scarlucci, I've spent 22 years defending the Constitution. I've bled for it in 2 different wars. I've lost friends who died for it. That Constitution guarantees equal protection under the law. No one is above it, not me, not you, and certainly not Sergeant Mercer. But more importantly, no one is beneath its protection either. Not the grandmother he terrorized, not the teenager he traumatized, not anyone." The 10th twist was the most devastating. Marcus introduced evidence that had just come to light: Mercer's personal cell phone records. In the hours after the incident, before the story broke, Mercer had texted his union rep, "Pulled over some military bitch tonight. Put her in her place good. These people think they're special. Showed her who's really in charge." The courtroom erupted. Judge Harper gavelled for order, but the damage was done. Mercer's own words had condemned him. His claim that it was a routine stop, that he'd acted professionally, that Adrienne had provoked him, all lies exposed by his own arrogant need to brag. As the hearing concluded for the day, Adrienne stood in the hallway, surrounded by reporters. But she didn't give them sound bites or dramatic quotes. She simply said, "This isn't about me. It's about everyone who's been victimized by someone who thought their badge made them untouchable. It's about accountability. It's about justice." Mercer pushed through the crowd, Scarlucci trying to hold him back. He stopped in front of Adrienne, his face twisted with rage. "You've ruined my life." "No, Sergeant Mercer," Adrienne replied calmly. "You ruined your own life the moment you decided your badge gave you the right to abuse others. I just made sure there were consequences." The preliminary hearing would continue for 3 more days. More witnesses would testify. More evidence would emerge. The pattern of abuse would become undeniable. But in that moment, in that hallway, the real verdict had already been delivered. The badge that Mercer had worn as armor had become his anchor, dragging him down into the consequences of his own actions. He'd thought it made him untouchable, above the law, beyond accountability. He'd thought wrong, and standing across from him, calm and composed in her uniform, adorned with medals earned through actual service and sacrifice, Adrienne Wallace represented everything he'd pretended to be, but never was a true protector, a genuine servant, a person who understood that real authority came not from power over others, but from the responsibility to protect them. The morning of day 4 brought an unexpected development. Marcus Whitman arrived at the courthouse to find FBI Special Agent Rachel Torres waiting by the security checkpoint, her expression grave beneath cropped auburn hair that caught the early light streaming through the glass doors. "Mr. Whitman, we need to talk, privately." They found an empty conference room where Torres spread out a series of photographs on the polished table. Each image showed Mercer meeting with different individuals in parking lots, alleys, and abandoned buildings over the past 3 weeks since the incident. "We've been monitoring Sergeant Mercer since your client's complaint triggered our civil rights investigation," Torres explained, her finger tracing the timeline of surveillance photos. "These meetings concerned us, but last night's development requires immediate action." She placed a final photograph on the table. It showed Mercer handling a thick envelope to a man Marcus recognized with a chill. Tommy Kruger, a private investigator who'd lost his license for fabricating evidence. "We believe Mercer is attempting to manufacture evidence against your client," Torres said. "Kruger was seen near Colonel Wallace's hotel this morning." Marcus immediately called Adrienne, who answered on the first ring. "Stay in your room. Lock the door. FBI is on the way." 20 minutes later, Adrienne sat in her hotel room with Agent Torres and 2 other FBI agents while they swept for surveillance devices. They found 3, 1 in the smoke detector, 1 behind the television, and 1 in the bathroom vent. The first mini-climax of this new phase struck when they discovered the devices were still transmitting. "We can use this," Torres said with a sharp smile. "Colonel Wallace, how do you feel about helping us catch them in the act?" Adrienne's response was immediate. "Tell me what you need." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Adrienne would have a staged phone conversation with Marcus, discussing fabricated concerns about her testimony, while the FBI traced the signal and prepared to arrest whoever was monitoring the illegal surveillance. As Adrienne performed her part flawlessly, her voice carrying just enough worry to be believable, Tommy Kruger sat in a van 2 blocks away recording every word. He was so focused on his equipment that he didn't notice the FBI vehicles surrounding him until Agent Torres knocked on his window. The second mini-climax erupted in the courtroom an hour later, when Judge Harper was informed of the morning's events. Her face turned to stone as Agent Torres presented the evidence of attempted witness tampering, and illegal surveillance. Mr. Scarlucci, Judge Harper's voice could have frozen hell itself. Were you aware of your client's activities? Scarlucci stood his usual confidence cracking. Your Honor, I had no knowledge. Sit down. The judge turned to Mercer. Sergeant Mercer, you're remanded into custody pending additional federal charges. Bailiff, take him into custody. Mercer exploded from his chair. This is a setup. She's military intelligence. She planned all of this. As court officers moved toward him, Mercer made a desperate decision. He lunged not for the exit, but toward Adrienne, his face contorted with rage. You destroyed everything. The third mini-climax struck, as Adrienne reacted with trained precision. She stepped into his charge, using his momentum against him, and with a simple redirect that looked almost gentle, sent him sprawling onto the courtroom floor. She never threw a punch, never struck him. She simply guided his own violent energy into the ground. That's assault in front of 30 witnesses, Marcus said calmly, as officers cuffed the dazed Mercer. Add it to the charges. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters scrambled to call their newsrooms. Scarlucci tried to withdraw from the case. Mercer was dragged out screaming about conspiracies and setups, while Judge Harper gavelled frantically for order. When calm finally returned, the first twist revealed itself through Agent Torres's additional testimony. The FBI had discovered that Mercer wasn't acting alone. The surveillance equipment, the payments to Kruger, the coordinated effort to discredit Adrienne. It was all funded by a dark money organization called the Blue Shield Foundation. Ostensibly a police charity, but actually a slush fund for covering up police misconduct. We've identified 17 other cases where this organization has funded similar operations. Torres testified. Colonel Wallace's case has broken open a nationwide conspiracy to obstruct justice. The revelation sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. Within hours, 3 more police departments were under federal investigation. The Blue Shield Foundation's offices were raided. Financial records were seized that implicated dozens of officers across 6 states in a coordinated campaign to silence victims of police abuse. Back in the courtroom with Mercer now absent and in federal custody, the hearing continued with a parade of his victims testifying. Each story built upon the last, creating a mosaic of abuse that spanned his entire career. Maria Gonzalez took the stand, her weathered hands trembling as she held a rosary. He pulled me over for a broken taillight that wasn't broken. When I asked why he really stopped me, he made me stand in the rain for 40 minutes while he ran my papers. I'm 73 years old. I've been in this country legally for 50 years. But to him, I was just another Mexican to humiliate. The fourth mini-climax arrived when Jerome Washington testified. The successful businessman wearing a perfectly tailored suit described how Mercer had held him at gunpoint during a routine traffic stop, claiming he matched the description of a robbery suspect, a white suspect, despite Jerome being black. He knew exactly what he was doing. Jerome said, his voice steady, but his eyes burning. He wanted me to know that my success, my education, my contributions to this community meant nothing. In that moment with his gun drawn, I was just another black man he could kill and claim he feared for his life. The second twist emerged when Deputy Patricia Chen returned to the stand with new information. She'd been contacted by former officers who'd left the force because of Mercer, and one had provided her with recordings from the department's supposedly broken dashcam system. The cameras were never broken, Chen testified. Mercer had administrative access to delete footage. But Officer Timothy Park, who works in IT, had been secretly backing up everything to a private server, knowing someday someone would need this evidence. The recovered footage was devastating. 17 incidents over 3 years each, showing Mercer escalating routine stops into displays of dominance. The worst showed him making a teenage boy lie face down in mud for officer safety during a stop for jaywalking. Marcus presented each video methodically, building a case that went beyond individual abuse to systematic terrorism under color of law. But he was also building something else, a class action lawsuit that would eventually include 43 plaintiffs and seek damages that would bankrupt the department's insurance carrier. The fifth mini-climax struck during the afternoon session when Linda Mercer Daniels' estranged wife took the stand. She'd come forward with more than just recordings. She brought journals documenting 20 years of her husband's escalating power addiction. "It started small," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He'd come home bragging about making someone cry during a stop. Said it was about respect for the badge. But it got worse. He started targeting specific types of people, anyone he thought couldn't fight back. Single women, elderly minorities, young people without lawyers for parents." She produced a journal entry from 5 years earlier where Mercer had written about his philosophy of policing. "Fear is respect. They need to fear us, or society falls apart. Every traffic stop is a lesson in who has power and who doesn't." Scarlucci, still technically representing Mercer, despite his attempts to withdraw, tried one last desperate cross-examination. "Mrs. Mercer, isn't it true you're going through a bitter divorce, that you'd say anything to hurt your husband?" Linda's response was quiet, but devastating. "He filed for divorce, Mr. Scarlucci. After I finally stood up to him. After 20 years of being afraid in my own home, I told him that what he was doing was wrong. That night, he grabbed me by the throat and said, 'I could kill you and make it look like self-defense. Who do you think they'd believe?' That's when I started recording everything." The sixth mini-climax arrived when the prosecution introduced evidence from Mercer's personal computer seized during the FBI raid. His browser history showed visits to extremist websites, forums, where officers shared tactics for avoiding accountability, and most damning, a private message board where he'd posted about Adrienne the night before the stop. "Saw this military bitch at the gas station," he'd written. "Think she's hot shit with her base sticker. Following her now. Time to teach some respect." The premeditation was undeniable. He'd targeted Adrienne not because of any traffic violation, but because she represented something he despised, authority earned through merit rather than intimidation. The third twist came from an unexpected source. Chief Crawford, who'd initially tried to minimize the scandal, had been conducting his own investigation. He took the stand as a prosecution witness, his career effectively over, but his conscience finally clear. "I failed in my duty," Crawford said, looking directly at Adrienne. "I knew Mercer was a problem. I'd received complaints. But he was protected by the union, by the Blue Shield Foundation, by a culture that valued loyalty over integrity. I chose my career over doing what was right, and people suffered because of my cowardice." Crawford produced documents showing that Mercer had been flagged for psychological evaluation 3 times, but had never been sent because the Blue Shield Foundation had intervened each time, threatening legal action if the department discriminated against him. "They called it supporting officers," Crawford said bitterly, "but it was really about protecting predators." The seventh mini-climax struck when a new witness was called, Officer Timothy Park, the IT specialist who'd been secretly preserving evidence. Park, a young Korean-American officer who'd joined the force to make a difference, testified about the systematic cover-up culture within the department. "I watched them delete footage, alter reports, lose complaints," Park said. "When I tried to report it through proper channels, I was told I was misunderstanding what I was seeing. That's when I started the backup server. I knew someday someone would stand up to them. I just didn't know it would take a lieutenant colonel to do what none of us had the courage to do." The fourth twist emerged when Park revealed he wasn't alone. A network of officers within the department had been secretly documenting abuses, calling themselves The constitutional cops officers, who'd taken their oath to the Constitution seriously. "There are 12 of us," Park testified. "We've been gathering evidence for 2 years, waiting for the right moment, the right case, the right person who couldn't be intimidated or bought off. Colonel Wallace was that person." The revelation split the department wide open. Officers turned on each other, some coming forward with their own evidence, others circling wagons around the old guard. The federal investigation expanded from pattern and practice to potential RICO charges for organized criminal conspiracy. The 8th mini-climax arrived when Marcus called a surprise witness, Master Sergeant Rebecca Hayes, who'd served under Adrienne in Afghanistan. Hayes, who'd lost her left leg to an IED, testified via video link from Walter Reed Medical Center. "Colonel Wallace saved my life," Hayes said simply. "Not just physically, though she did carry me 200 meters under fire to the medevac site. But she saved my life by showing me what real leadership looks like. It's not about power over others. It's about responsibility for others. When I saw what that cop did to her, I knew she'd handle it the same way she handled Taliban fighters, with courage, intelligence, and absolute determination to protect others." Hayes then revealed something that hadn't been in any report. "The colonel has PTSD from our deployments. She doesn't talk about it, but I know the symptoms. The hypervigilance, the controlled responses to threats. When that cop escalated the situation, he was threatening someone who'd been under fire in actual combat. The fact that she remained so calm, so controlled, that's not normal. That's exceptional." The 5th twist was the most shocking. Agent Torres returned to the stand with breaking news. The FBI had arrested 3 more officers that morning, including Lieutenant James Morrison, Mercer's direct supervisor, who'd been receiving payments from the Blue Shield Foundation to protect Mercer and others like him. But more importantly, they discovered that the foundation was funded by private prison corporations who had a financial interest in maintaining high arrest rates. Every person Mercer had falsely arrested, every life he'd disrupted, had been part of a larger scheme to fill prison beds for profit. "This goes beyond individual corruption," Torres testified. "This is systematic exploitation of police power for corporate profit. Colonel Wallace didn't just expose a bad cop, she exposed a criminal enterprise." The courtroom was silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about one traffic stop, one bad officer, or even one corrupt department. It was about a system designed to generate arrests, to create criminals, to feed a machine that profited from human misery. Adrienne sat through it all with the same composure she'd maintained throughout. But those who knew her could see the anger in the set of her jaw, the determination in her eyes. She'd fought terrorists overseas, but this corruption of justice in her own country, this was personal. The 9th mini-climax came when Scarlucci, perhaps seeing a chance for redemption, or simply recognizing the inevitable, made an unexpected announcement. "Your Honor, I've been in contact with Mr. Mercer in federal custody. He wishes to change his plea to guilty on all charges and cooperate fully with the federal investigation in exchange for consideration in sentencing." The courtroom erupted again. Mercer, the man who'd thought his badge made him untouchable, was ready to turn on everyone to save himself. The blue wall of silence hadn't just cracked, it had shattered. Judge Harper called for a recess to consider this development. As people filed out, Adrienne found herself face to face with Maria Gonzalez, the elderly woman who'd been one of Mercer's victims. "Thank you," Maria said, tears in her eyes. "I prayed for years that someone would stop him. I never imagined it would be a soldier." "I'm not just a soldier," Adrienne replied gently. "I'm an American citizen just like you, and we both deserve to be treated with dignity and respect by those who claim to serve and protect." The 10th mini-climax arrived when court reconvened. Judge Harper announced that she was accepting Mercer's guilty plea, but was also issuing immediate injunctions against the Blue Shield Foundation, freezing their assets and prohibiting them from funding any legal defenses while under federal investigation. Furthermore, Judge Harper continued, based on the evidence presented, I'm referring this entire matter to the Department of Justice for potential prosecution under the Racketeer, Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. What we've seen here isn't just misconduct, it's organized crime hiding behind badges. As day 4 of the hearing concluded, Adrienne stood on the courthouse steps. The crowd had grown larger, the protests more vocal. Some still supported Mercer holding back the blue signs, but they were outnumbered now by citizens demanding accountability. Marcus stood beside her as reporters pushed forward with questions. But before Adrienne could speak, a group of officers in uniform approached. For a moment, tension rippled through the crowd. Then the lead officer, a sergeant named David Kim, saluted. "Colonel Wallace," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "we want you to know that not all of us are like Mercer. Some of us remember our oath, and we're grateful that you had the courage to do what we should have done years ago." One by one, 11 other officers saluted the constitutional cops, revealing themselves publicly choosing integrity over the comfortable silence that had protected their careers. Adrienne returned their salute, then turned to the crowd. "This isn't about being anti-police. This is about being pro-justice. Good officers, honest officers, brave officers. They're victims of corruption, too. When bad cops like Mercer operate with impunity, they tarnish the badge that honorable officers wear with pride. Change isn't just necessary, it's overdue." That night, Adrienne sat in her hotel room, a different hotel, one the FBI had secured, and video called her daughter, Captain Sarah Wallace, stationed in Germany. "Mom, I'm proud of you," Sarah said, "but I'm also worried. These people, they're dangerous." "So were the Taliban," Adrienne replied. "But here's the difference. The Taliban were honest about being our enemies. These corrupt cops hide behind the very laws they violate. That makes them more dangerous, but it also makes them more vulnerable. Because once exposed, they have nowhere to run." The conversation was interrupted by a call from Marcus. The news was explosive. 3 more police departments in other states had announced internal investigations after their officers were implicated in the Blue Shield Foundation scandal. Mercer's case had become the match that lit a nationwide firestorm of police accountability. But the day's final twist was yet to come. At 11:47 p.m., Adrienne received an encrypted message on her military phone. It was from General Patricia Thompson, her commanding officer. "Colonel Wallace, the Secretary of Defense, has been following your case. He's asked me to inform you that the military is prepared to provide full support, including JAG resources and security if needed. No one threatens our officers without consequences. Additionally, your actions in standing up to corruption exemplify the finest traditions of military service. There will be recognition for this." Adrienne smiled grimly. She hadn't done this for recognition. She'd done it because it was right, because someone had to, because a badge, whether military or civilian, meant accepting responsibility, not wielding impunity. As she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with one more message. This one was from an unknown number, but the FBI had cleared it. The message was simple. "I'm Officer Janet Rodriguez, Miami PD. Mercer's cousin Frank Mercer is on our force. Same behavior, same protection. After seeing what you did, I'm coming forward. You've started something, Colonel. Thank you for showing us the way." Adrienne set down her phone and looked out at the Ohio night. Tomorrow would bring day 5 of the hearing Mercer's formal guilty plea, and the beginning of what would become the largest police corruption investigation in American history. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The badge that Daniel Mercer had thought made him untouchable had become the very thing that brought him down. Every abuse of power had been another link in the chain that now bound him. Every victim he dismissed as powerless had become part of the army that defeated him. And at the center of it all stood a lieutenant colonel who'd learned in the mountains of Afghanistan that real courage wasn't about having power. It was about standing up to those who abused it, no matter what uniform they wore. The fifth day of hearings dawned with an unexpected visitor at Adrienne's hotel room door. FBI agent Torres stood in the hallway at 5:43 a.m., her expression grim, flanked by two additional agents whose hands rested casually but deliberately near their service weapons. "Colonel Wallace, we need to move you immediately. There's been a credible threat." As they rushed Adrienne through the service entrance to a waiting black SUV, Torres explained that Mercer's cousin Frank in Miami had been arrested attempting to board a flight to Columbus with an unregistered firearm. Text messages on his phone revealed he blamed Adrienne for destroying his family's reputation. "He wasn't coming here to talk," Torres said, as the convoy pulled into an underground parking garage at a federal building. "We're taking this threat seriously. You'll be transported to and from the courthouse under federal protection." The first mini-climax struck when they arrived at the courthouse to find it surrounded not just by media and protesters, but by a massive showing of military veterans. Hundreds of them, some in wheelchairs, others on crutches, many in their old uniforms, had formed a protective corridor from the federal vehicles to the courthouse entrance. "Nobody threatens one of ours," growled Master Sergeant Jake Morrison, a Gulf War veteran with arms like tree trunks. "Colonel Wallace stood for us overseas. We stand for her here." Adrienne walked through that corridor with her head high, saluting the veterans who saluted her, shaking hands with those who reached out. The image would become iconic, a single officer protected not by law enforcement, but by the brothers and sisters who understood what real service meant. Inside courtroom 3A, the atmosphere was electric. Word of Frank Mercer's arrest had leaked, and the gallery buzzed with speculation. Judge Harper entered looking haggard, as if she hadn't slept, carrying a thick folder that she placed carefully on her bench. "Before we proceed with Sergeant Mercer's plea," she began, "this court has received overnight filings that require immediate attention. Mr. Whitman, Mr. Scarlucci approach." The hushed conference at the bench lasted 10 minutes. When the attorneys returned to their tables, Marcus looked stunned while Scarlucci appeared physically ill. The first twist arrived when Judge Harper addressed the courtroom. "The Department of Justice has informed this court that their investigation has uncovered evidence of a murder conspiracy. 3 weeks before the traffic stop involving Colonel Wallace, Sergeant Mercer, and unknown conspirators discussed, and I quote from intercepted communications, permanent solutions to the military problem." The courtroom erupted. Adrienne felt the blood drain from her face as the implication hit her. The traffic stop hadn't been random harassment. It had been a potential assassination attempt that had gone sideways when she'd remained calm and compliant. Agent Torres took the stand to present the new evidence. Encrypted messages recovered from a burner phone showed Mercer had been in communication with someone using the handle Blue Line 1488, the numbers a clear reference to white supremacist ideology. The messages discussed how certain military officers, particularly female and minority officers, were weakening America's warrior culture. Colonel Wallace's name appears 17 times in these communications, Torres testified. She'd been identified after speaking at a police-military cooperation conference where she advocated for accountability and oversight. The traffic stop was meant to escalate into a situation where lethal force could be justified. The second mini-climax arrived when Torres revealed that Adrienne's dashcam had likely saved her life. Mercer aborted the plan when Colonel Wallace mentioned the recording. He attempted to provoke her into physical resistance to justify escalation, but her training and composure prevented that outcome. Mercer, brought in from federal custody in shackles, looked smaller than he had just days ago. His gray suit hung loose on his frame, and his eyes darted constantly to the exits, as if calculating escape routes that didn't exist. When Judge Harper asked if he understood the new charges being added, conspiracy to commit murder of a federal officer, he could only nod. But Scarlucci, perhaps seeing his last chance to salvage something from his career implosion, made an unexpected motion. "Your Honor, my client wishes to provide information about the conspiracy in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table." The second twist unfolded as Mercer, in a voice barely above a whisper, began naming names. The conspiracy reached into multiple police departments, several military bases, where sympathizers had infiltrated as civilian contractors, and most shockingly, into the offices of 2 state representatives who'd been funneling state funds to the Blue Shield Foundation. "We called ourselves the Patriot Guard," Mercer said, his voice gaining strength as he realized cooperation was his only path to survival. "We believed we were saving America from being weakened by social justice warriors and affirmative action appointees. Colonel Wallace she was supposed to be an example, a message." Adrienne listened to this with the same expression she'd worn when coordinating airstrikes under mortar fire, controlled, focused, processing information that would be dealt with later when there was time for emotion. But those who knew her could see her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. The third mini-climax erupted when one of the named conspirators, Detective Ray Hammond, stood up in the gallery where he'd been watching and tried to run. He made it 3 steps before the veterans in attendance tackled him, holding him down until federal marshals could take custody. The 60-year-old Marine who'd initiated the tackle simply said, "Semper Fi, Colonel," to Adrienne as Hammond was dragged away. Judge Harper called a recess to allow federal authorities to process the new arrests being made based on Mercer's testimony. During the break, Adrienne found herself in a secure conference room with Marcus Agent Torres and, surprisingly, General Patricia Thompson, who'd flown in from the Pentagon. "Adrienne," the general said, using her first name for the first time in their professional relationship, "this has become a matter of national security. Domestic terrorists infiltrating police departments to target military officers. The Secretary of Defense is personally involved now." "With respect, General, I didn't sign up to be bait for extremists," Adrienne replied. "No, you didn't. But you've exposed something we've been tracking, but couldn't prove: a coordinated effort to undermine military diversity initiatives through violence and intimidation. Your courage has given us the break we needed." The third twist arrived when General Thompson revealed that military intelligence had been monitoring similar patterns at bases across the country. Officers who'd spoken out about extremism in the ranks had suffered accidents or been targeted by local law enforcement for harassment. Adrienne's case had connected dots they'd been trying to link for 2 years. When court reconvened, the scope of the proceedings had fundamentally changed. This was no longer just about a traffic stop or even police corruption. It was about domestic terrorism, about an attempt to use law enforcement power to wage war on fellow Americans deemed insufficiently patriotic. Marcus called a new witness, Dr. Elizabeth Kramer, an expert on extremist infiltration of law enforcement. Her testimony was chilling as she explained how groups like the Patriot Guard operated using their positions of authority to target those they viewed as enemies while protecting each other through a twisted interpretation of the thin blue line. What Sergeant Mercer did to Colonel Wallace wasn't an isolated incident of power abuse, Dr. Kramer testified. It was part of a coordinated campaign of terror designed to silence and eliminate voices of progress within our institutions. The fourth mini-climax arrived when the prosecution played audio recordings from a Patriot Guard meeting secretly recorded by one of the constitutional cops who'd infiltrated the group. Mercer's voice was clear as he discussed target packages on various military officers, activists, and journalists. Adrienne's name came up repeatedly, described as a priority target because of her influence and visibility. She thinks she's untouchable because of her rank and medals, Mercer said on the recording. But everybody has a breaking point. Everybody can be made to look like a threat. And when they threaten a cop, well, we know how that ends. The recording continued with other voices, discussing tactics, how to provoke reactions, how to position dash cams to miss key moments, how to write reports that would justify any level of force. It was a masterclass in weaponizing police authority, and it had been happening for years. The fourth twist emerged when one of the voices on the recording was identified as Assistant Chief Harold Morrison of the Columbus Police Department, Chief Crawford's second in command, and the man who'd been expected to take over when Crawford retired. Morrison had been the inside man protecting Mercer and others, ensuring complaints disappeared and investigations went nowhere. Federal marshals arrested Morrison during the lunch break. He was walked out of police headquarters in handcuffs as news cameras rolled his 28-year career destroyed in an instant. Chief Crawford, watching from his office window, later said it was like discovering your own brother was a terrorist. The fifth mini-climax struck when Linda Mercer returned to testify this time, with information about her husband's connections that she'd previously been too frightened to reveal. She described meetings at their home where men in police uniforms discussed race war and defending white America, while planning which officers and citizens to target. I was terrified, Linda said, tears streaming down her face. Not just of Daniel, but of all of them. They had badges. They had guns. They had each other's backs. Who would believe me? Who would protect me? She revealed that she'd started recording these meetings 2 years ago, hiding tiny devices throughout their home. The FBI had retrieved 18 hours of recordings that were now being analyzed with each hour, revealing new conspirators and new crimes. The night before he stopped Colonel Wallace, Linda testified, Daniel was on the phone with someone he called Command. They discussed making an example that would echo through the ranks. He loaded his service weapon with special ammunition hollow points he wasn't supposed to have. He said, "Tomorrow we send a message." The sixth mini-climax arrived when a commotion erupted outside the courthouse. The crowd of protesters had swelled to thousands, with tensions rising between those supporting police accountability and a smaller but vocal group of Blue Shield Foundation supporters who'd been bussed in from surrounding states. The situation exploded when someone in the Blue Shield crowd threw a bottle at the veterans protecting the courthouse. Within seconds, a brawl erupted that required riot police to separate the groups. 17 people were arrested, including 2 off-duty officers from Indiana who'd come to support Mercer. Inside the courtroom, Judge Harper was forced to consider whether to continue the proceedings given the security situation. But Adrienne stood and addressed the court, her voice carrying the same authority that had commanded squadrons in combat zones. Your Honor, if we stop now, they win. Their goal is to use intimidation and violence to prevent justice. I've faced Taliban fighters who wanted me dead. I'm not backing down from extremists wearing badges. The gallery erupted in applause before Judge Harper could gavel for order. The proceedings would continue, but with enhanced security, including metal detectors at every entrance, and federal marshals positioned throughout the building. The fifth twist arrived with explosive testimony from Officer Timothy Park, who revealed he had video evidence from inside the police station that had never been turned over. The footage showed Mercer and 5 other officers watching Adrienne's dashcam video the day after the incident and discussing how to destroy her credibility. We need to find something on her, Mercer said on the video. Check her military record, her finances, her family. Everyone has dirt, and if we can't find it, we create it. Another officer identified as Sergeant Paul Williams responded, I know a guy who can plant evidence. Used him before on that activist case. Never been caught. The conspiracy to frame Adrienne had been planned from the beginning, only derailed by the FBI's intervention and the speed at which the story had gone viral. The video showed them discussing planting drugs in her hotel room, creating fake witnesses to claim she'd been driving erratically, even manufacturing a military discipline record that didn't exist. The seventh mini-climax struck when Marcus introduced evidence that the Patriot Guard had a literal kill list of 127 targets across the country. Military officers who supported diversity initiatives, police officers who reported corruption, journalists who investigated police abuse, judges who ruled against law enforcement, activists who protested police violence. This wasn't law enforcement, Marcus said, his voice ringing through the courtroom. This was organized terrorism, hiding behind badges. Every person on this list was marked for harassment, false arrest, or worse. Colonel Wallace wasn't just brave in standing up to Mercer. She was lucky to survive. The list included 3 federal judges, 2 of whom reported that they'd experienced suspicious traffic stops in recent months. One congressman's daughter had been arrested on fabricated charges that were later dropped. A journalist investigating police corruption had died in a random mugging where nothing was taken. Agent Torres returned to the stand with updates from the expanding investigation. We've made 43 arrests in 6 states. We've identified cells of the Patriot Guard in 17 police departments. What Colonel Wallace exposed wasn't a few bad apples. It was a cancer spreading through law enforcement. The 8th mini-climax arrived when an unexpected witness was called Sergeant Daniel Mercer's father, retired police chief William Mercer. The elder Mercer, now 73, and walking with a cane, had come forward after seeing what his son had become. "I spent 35 years in law enforcement," he said, his voice heavy with shame. "I taught my son that the badge meant service, meant honor, meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Somewhere along the way, he lost that. Or maybe I failed to really teach it." He looked directly at his son, who couldn't meet his eyes. "Daniel, what you did to Colonel Wallace, what you did to all those people, that's not policing. That's everything I stood against. Everything real cops stand against. You didn't just betray your oath. You betrayed every honest officer who ever wore a badge." The emotional testimony left many in the gallery in tears, including several police officers who'd come to support accountability. The image of a father denouncing his son's corruption while defending the true meaning of law enforcement would become one of the defining moments of the trial. The 9th mini-climax struck when Judge Harper announced she was issuing a landmark ruling. Based on the evidence presented, she was referring the entire case to the International Criminal Court, arguing that the systematic targeting of military officers and civilians based on race, gender, and political beliefs constituted crimes against humanity. While this court lacks jurisdiction for such charges, Judge Harper stated, the evidence demands international attention. When law enforcement becomes a tool of terrorism, when badges become weapons of oppression, the entire fabric of civilization is threatened. The ruling was unprecedented and would spark legal debates for years to come. But in that moment, it represented a judge's determination that justice would not be limited by traditional boundaries when the crimes themselves had transcended normal categories. As the day drew to a close, Mercer was brought forward for his formal plea. He stood in shackles, flanked by federal marshals, as Judge Harper read the charges, now numbering 47 separate counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, domestic terrorism, civil rights violations, and racketeering. "How do you plead?" Judge Harper asked. Mercer's voice was barely audible. "Guilty, Your Honor. Guilty on all counts." The 10th mini-climax arrived moments later, when Mercer asked to make a statement. Judge Harper allowed it, and Mercer turned to face Adrienne for the first time since his arrest. "Colonel Wallace," he began, his voice cracking, "I hated you before I ever met you. Not for anything you did, but for what you represented. You earned your authority through service and sacrifice, while I took mine through fear and force. You were everything I pretended to be, but never was. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I'm not asking for forgiveness. What I did is unforgivable. But I want you to know that your courage, your refusal to be intimidated, it didn't just expose me. It exposed the sickness in law enforcement that needs to be cut out. Maybe that's the only good thing to come from this. Adrienne stood slowly, her bearing military perfect. When she spoke, her voice carried across the silent courtroom. Sergeant Mercer, you thought your badge made you untouchable. You were wrong. But more importantly, you thought my uniform made me your enemy. You were wrong about that too. We both swore oaths to defend the Constitution, to protect and serve. The difference is, I honored mine. She paused, then continued. Your confession and cooperation may reduce your sentence, but it won't erase what you did. Every person you terrorized, every life you disrupted, every oath you betrayed, that's your legacy. But if your exposure helps prevent even one other officer from following your path, if it saves even one person from abuse of power, then perhaps something meaningful can come from this tragedy. As Adrienne sat back down, the courtroom remained silent for a full minute. Then slowly applause began, from the gallery started by the veterans joined by the constitutional cops, spreading through the entire room until even Judge Harper had to pause before gaveling for order. That evening, Adrienne stood on the steps of the courthouse for what would become a historic press conference. Flanked by General Thompson Agent Torres Marcus Whitman, and surprisingly William Mercer Daniel's father, who'd asked to stand with her, she addressed the nation. What happened to me happens to countless Americans every day, she began. The only difference is that I had the training resources and support to fight back. Most victims of police abuse don't. They suffer in silence, their lives destroyed by those who've weaponized their badges. She continued, this isn't about being anti-police. The brave officers who came forward, the constitutional cops, who risked everything to expose corruption, the honest cops who've supported this investigation, they're heroes. They're what law enforcement should be. But we can no longer tolerate a system that protects predators, that shields extremists, that allows badges to become licenses for terror. William Mercer stepped forward, his aged hands trembling as he took the microphone. As the father of a corrupt cop, as a former chief myself, I'm calling for nationwide reform. Psychological evaluations, accountability measures, civilian oversight, not to punish good cops, but to protect them from being tainted by the bad ones. My son's actions have shown us the cost of silence, of looking the other way. That cost is too high. The press conference continued for an hour with questions ranging from policy proposals to personal safety concerns. Through it all, Adrienne maintained the same composed bearing that had carried her through combat zones and courtrooms alike. As the sun set over Columbus, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps, one chapter was closing, but another was beginning. The federal investigation would eventually lead to 218 arrests across 12 states. The Blue Shield Foundation would be dissolved, its assets seized and distributed to victims of police abuse. The Patriot Guard would be designated a domestic terrorist organization. But perhaps the most significant change came in the form of the Wallace Act, federal legislation requiring psychological evaluation of law enforcement officers, mandatory reporting of abuse allegations, and civilian oversight of all police departments receiving federal funding. It would take 2 years to pass, but when it did, it would transform American policing. That night in her hotel room under federal protection, Adrienne finally allowed herself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. She'd faced down an attempt on her life, exposed a terrorist network, and sparked a national reckoning on police corruption. But as she looked at the messages flooding her phone from veterans thanking her, from abuse victims finding courage in her example, from honest cops, grateful someone had finally stood up, she knew the fight had been worth it. Her phone rang. It was her daughter Sarah calling from Germany, where it was already morning. "Mom, your international news. The whole base is talking about you. They're calling you the colonel who brought down the blue wall." "I didn't bring down anything," Adrienne replied. "I just refused to accept that a badge made someone untouchable." The wall came down because it was built on a foundation of lies and intimidation. Truth has a way of destroying such structures. As she ended the call, Adrienne looked out at the city lights of Columbus. Tomorrow would bring Mercer's sentencing more arrests, more revelations. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd faced corruption and refused to yield. She'd confronted terrorism and refused to flee. She'd stood for justice when standing was dangerous. The badge that Daniel Mercer had thought made him untouchable had instead become the symbol of his downfall. And the uniform that Adrienne wore had proven what it truly meant: not power over others, but the courage to protect them, even from those who claimed to be protectors themselves. The morning of sentencing arrived with an amber alert on every phone in Columbus. Adrienne's protection detail burst into her hotel room at 4:17 a.m. Agent Torres's face tight with urgency as she held up her phone, showing the alert. "Mercer's 10-year-old son has been kidnapped, taken from his mother's house 2 hours ago." Adrienne was instantly alert, her military training kicking in. "The Patriot Guard. Unknown, but the timing isn't coincidental. We need to move you to a secure location immediately." As they rushed through the hotel's service corridors, Torres explained that Linda Mercer had woken to find her son Michael's bedroom window forced open, a note left on his pillow. "Traitors pay in blood. Drop charges, or the boy dies." The first mini-climax struck when they reached the underground parking garage to find it swarming with FBI agents surrounding a van with blown-out tires. Inside, zip-tied and unconscious, were 3 men in tactical gear who'd been attempting to ambush Adrienne's convoy. "They knew our route," Torres said grimly. "We have a leak." The secure location turned out to be Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where General Thompson had established a military command center. The base's security was military-grade, and more importantly, completely separate from civilian law enforcement, where the leak likely originated. Inside the command center, screens displayed real-time intelligence from multiple agencies searching for Michael Mercer. Adrienne found herself in the surreal position of helping to save the son of the man who'd tried to destroy her. "I want to help," she told General Thompson. "That boy didn't choose his father." The first twist arrived when surveillance footage from Linda Mercer's neighborhood revealed something shocking. The kidnapper was Frank Mercer, Daniel's cousin, who'd been released on bail after his arrest at the airport. But he wasn't working alone. The footage showed 2 other figures, one wearing a police uniform. "He's using his father's kidnapping to stop the testimony," Agent Torres said, studying the footage. "If Mercer refuses to testify about the Patriot Guard, dozens of conspirators walk free." Linda Mercer was brought to the base for her safety, her face ravaged by tears and terror. When she saw Adrienne, she collapsed into her arms, sobbing. "They took my baby because of what Daniel did. Please, Colonel, you're military, you can find him." Adrienne held the woman who'd once been married to her tormentor, feeling the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. "We'll find him, Linda. I promise you that." The second mini-climax erupted when Daniel Mercer, watching the news from federal custody, made a desperate decision. He attacked his guards in an attempt to escape, apparently believing he could find his son himself. It took 4 officers to subdue him, and he was left bloodied and shackled in solitary confinement. From his cell, he sent a message through his lawyer to Adrienne. "I know I have no right to ask, but please save my son. I'll tell you everything, every name, every plan, everything about the Patriot Guard. Just save Michael." The command center received the message as teams coordinated the search. Adrienne made a decision that surprised everyone. She asked to speak with Mercer directly via video link. When Mercer's face appeared on the screen, bruised from his escape attempt, his eyes held none of their former arrogance. Only desperation remained. "Colonel Wallace," he began, his voice breaking. "I know what I am. I know what I've done. But Michael is innocent. He's 10 years old. He wants to be a veterinarian. He loves animals more than people, probably because people like me have disappointed him." "Tell me about Frank," Adrienne said, her tone professional. "Where would he take Michael?" The second twist unfolded as Mercer revealed that Frank wasn't just his cousin. He was a founding member of the Patriot Guard's most extreme cell, the one that had opposed Mercer's cooperation with authorities. "Frank thinks I'm a traitor for confessing. He said blood traitors deserve blood punishment. He's capable of anything. He once told me he'd burned down a mosque in Michigan and made it look like an electrical fire, killed 3 people and laughed about it." Mercer provided addresses, names, locations where Frank had safe houses. But more importantly, he revealed that Frank had a partner inside the FBI itself, Special Agent Richard Holman, who'd been feeding information to the Patriot Guard from the beginning. The third mini-climax struck when Agent Torres immediately moved to arrest Holman, only to find his desk cleared and his badge left behind. He'd fled the moment the kidnapping story broke, knowing his exposure was imminent. Security footage showed Holman leaving the federal building at 3:47 a.m., 20 minutes before Michael was kidnapped. He'd been part of the planning, had provided the protection details route, had enabled the attempted ambush. "He knows our procedures, our safe houses, our communication protocols," Torres said, her face grim. "We have to assume everything is compromised." That's when Officer Timothy Park, the IT specialist from the Constitutional Cops, stepped forward with crucial intelligence. "I've been monitoring Patriot Guard dark web communications. They're planning something they call the Reckoning. Michael's kidnapping is just the beginning." Park pulled up encrypted messages on his laptop. The Patriot Guard was mobilizing nationwide. If Mercer's testimony proceeded, they planned coordinated attacks on courthouses, FBI offices, and the homes of everyone involved in the prosecution. The third twist arrived when a video was posted on social media. Michael Mercer tied to a chair in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse, crying for his mother. Frank Mercer's voice came from off-camera. "Drop all charges against Daniel Mercer and his fellow patriots by noon, or the bloodline ends here." It was 8:47 a.m. They had just over 3 hours. Linda Mercer became hysterical, begging Adrienne to drop the charges, to stop the prosecution, to do anything to save her son. "Please, you're a mother too. You understand. Please don't let them kill my baby." Adrienne faced an impossible choice: justice for dozens of victims versus the life of an innocent child. But her military training had taught her that giving in to terrorist demands only encouraged more terrorism. "We're not dropping charges," she said firmly. "We're going to find Michael and stop these terrorists. That's what they are, terrorists. And I don't negotiate with terrorists, whether they're in Afghanistan or Ohio." The fourth mini-climax erupted when Marcus Whitman arrived with shocking news. 3 more children had been kidnapped, the sons and daughters of prosecutors and judges involved in cases against Patriot Guard members. The organization was holding the entire justice system hostage. "They're forcing us to choose," Marcus said. "Justice or innocent lives?" General Thompson made a decisive call. "This is now a military operation under the Domestic Terrorism Act. Colonel Wallace, you're being temporarily recalled to active tactical duty. You'll lead the hostage recovery operation." Adrienne didn't hesitate. Within minutes, she was in tactical gear, coordinating with a joint task force of military special operations and FBI hostage rescue team members. Her experience in coordinating complex operations in hostile territory made her uniquely qualified for this mission. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Master Sergeant Rebecca Hayes, the soldier who'd testified via video link from Walter Reed, called in with intelligence from her hospital bed. "Colonel, I've been analyzing the video of Michael. That warehouse, I recognize it. We studied similar structures in urban warfare training. The acoustics, the concrete composition, it's an old Cold War civil defense warehouse. There are only 3 in Ohio." Teams were dispatched to all 3 locations simultaneously. Adrienne insisted on leading the team to the most likely site, an abandoned facility outside Dayton, where Frank Mercer had once worked as a security guard. The 4th twist revealed itself when they arrived to find not just Michael, but 12 other hostages, judges, prosecutors, and journalists who'd been kidnapped over the previous weeks and reported as missing persons. The Patriot Guard had been building to this moment for months. The warehouse was a fortress with armed guards, surveillance systems, and what appeared to be explosives rigged to the entrances. Frank Mercer had turned it into what he called Fort Constitution, a last stand for his twisted vision of patriotism. Through thermal imaging, they counted 17 hostiles inside, all heavily armed. A direct assault would likely result in hostage casualties. Adrienne needed another approach. "Get me Daniel Mercer on the phone," she ordered. The 5th mini-climax struck when Daniel, still in federal custody, was connected to the command post. Adrienne put him on speaker so Frank could hear if they managed to establish contact. "Daniel, your son needs you. Not as a corrupt cop, but as a father. Help us save him." Daniel's voice cracked with emotion. "Frank has a weakness. He's terrified of dogs. Was bitten as a child, nearly died. He won't expect K9 units." It was a small detail, but in tactical operations, small details saved lives. Adrienne modified the assault plan, incorporating military working dogs into the breach strategy. At 11:23 a.m., 37 minutes before the deadline, Adrienne initiated contact with Frank Mercer. Using a bullhorn from behind an armored vehicle, she called out to the warehouse. "Frank Mercer, this is Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace. You wanted me, you've got my attention. Let's talk." Frank's response came through a speaker system he'd rigged. "The race traitor shows herself. You destroyed my family, my cousin, our cause. Now you'll watch these hostages die." "Your cousin is on the line," Adrienne said. "He wants to talk to his son." The 6th mini-climax arrived when Michael's voice suddenly came through the speakers crying, "Daddy, Daddy, I'm scared. Uncle Frank is scary. He hurt people." Daniel's anguished voice carried across the parking lot. "Michael, buddy, it's going to be okay. The soldiers are going to save you. Be brave, son. Be braver than I ever was." "You made me do this, Daniel!" Frank screamed through the speakers. "You betrayed the cause, betrayed your race, betrayed everything we stood for." "I betrayed nothing but corruption and hatred," Daniel replied, his voice stronger now. "I spent 20 years thinking my badge made me special, made me superior. I was wrong, Frank. We were both wrong. Let my son go. Let them all go. This isn't patriotism, it's terrorism." The 5th twist came when Agent Holman's voice suddenly joined Frank's on the speaker. The rogue FBI agent had been inside the whole time, helping coordinate the hostage situation. "Colonel Wallace," Holman said, his voice cold and professional. "You have 20 minutes to announce that all charges are dropped, or we start executing hostages. 1 every 5 minutes, starting with the children." Adrienne felt rage course through her, but kept her voice steady. "Agent Holman, you took an oath to protect and serve. These children have nothing to do with—" A gunshot rang out from inside the warehouse. Screams followed. Then Frank's voice. "That was a warning shot. Next one won't be." The 7th mini-climax erupted when surveillance drones detected movement on the warehouse's roof. 3 Patriot Guard members were setting up what appeared to be a live streaming setup preparing to broadcast the executions to inspire their followers nationwide. General Thompson made the call. "Colonel Wallace, you are authorized to execute Operation Iron Justice. Save those hostages." Adrienne coordinated the assault with military precision. 3 teams would breach simultaneously Alpha through the loading dock, with K-9 units leading Bravo through the roof skylight, using rappelling gear, Charlie through a sewer access tunnel discovered in old city blueprints. At 11:43 a.m., 17 minutes before the deadline, Adrienne gave the order. "Execute, execute, execute." The assault was swift and decisive. The K-9 units caused exactly the panic Daniel had predicted, with Frank Mercer freezing in terror as a German shepherd charged toward him. He was subdued before he could reach the dead man's switch for the explosives. The 8th mini-climax struck when Agent Holman tried to execute Michael Mercer as a final act of vengeance. But Adrienne leading Alpha Team put 2 rounds center mass into Holman before he could pull the trigger. The corrupt agent felt his weapon clattering away as Michael ran into the arms of a female FBI agent. The warehouse erupted in chaos as Patriot Guard members engaged in a firefight with the assault teams. But they were outmaneuvered, outgunned, and most importantly, outmatched by professional soldiers who'd faced far worse in actual combat zones. In 7 minutes it was over. 17 Patriot Guard members were in custody, or dead. All 13 hostages were recovered alive, though several needed medical attention for dehydration and beatings they'd endured. The 9th mini-climax arrived when Frank Mercer zip-tied, and being led to a transport vehicle, made one last desperate play. He'd concealed a ceramic knife in his boot and lunged at Adrienne as he was passing her position. But Adrienne had survived too many combat zones to be caught off guard. She sidestepped, caught his wrist, and with a move that looked almost gentle, redirected his momentum into the side of an armored vehicle. Frank collapsed unconscious, the knife spinning harmlessly away. "That's the difference between us," she said to his unconscious form. "You use force from hate. I use it to protect." Michael Mercer was reunited with his mother in a scene that brought tears to even hardened federal agents. The boy was traumatized, but physically unharmed, clinging to Linda as medical teams checked him over. Daniel watched via video link from his cell, tears streaming down his face, as his son was saved by the woman he'd tried to destroy. "Colonel Wallace," he said, his voice barely audible. "I don't have words. You saved my son after everything I did to you. I don't understand that kind of honor. That's exactly why you're where you are, and I'm where I am," Adrienne replied. "Honor isn't about who deserves protection. It's about being the person who provides it." The 10th mini-climax struck when emergency broadcasts began reporting simultaneous raids across the country. The intelligence gathered from the warehouse and the captured Patriot Guard members had triggered a nationwide operation. FBI, ATF, and military units struck 43 locations simultaneously, dismantling the entire Patriot Guard network in one coordinated action. By the time Adrienne returned to the federal courthouse for the delayed sentencing hearing, the world had changed. What had started as a traffic stop in Ohio had exposed and destroyed a domestic terrorist network that had infiltrated law enforcement agencies across America. Judge Harper gavelled the packed courtroom to order at 4:00 p.m. Daniel Mercer stood in chains, but his posture was different now, broken, defeated, but somehow more human than he'd appeared before. "Sergeant Mercer," Judge Harper began, "your cooperation in saving the hostages, particularly your son, has been noted. However, it does not erase your crimes. You violated your oath, betrayed public trust, and participated in a terrorist conspiracy that targeted American citizens based on race, gender, and political beliefs." She continued, "The court sentences you to 35 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years contingent on continued cooperation with authorities. You will forfeit your pension, be permanently barred from law enforcement, and register as a domestic terrorist. Mercer accepted the sentence without protest. As he was led away, he stopped and turned to Adrienne one last time. My son will grow up knowing that the woman I tried to destroy saved his life. Maybe that knowledge will help him become a better man than his father. Frank Mercer and the surviving Patriot Guard leadership received life sentences without parole for domestic terrorism, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Agent Holman died from his wounds avoiding trial, but not justice. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. The Wallace Act passed Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support, fundamentally reforming police oversight and accountability. The Blue Shield Foundation's assets were liquidated with $847 million distributed to victims of police abuse. 3 weeks after the sentencing, Adrienne stood before Congress to testify about the experience. The chamber was packed with veterans, law enforcement officers, civil rights leaders, and citizens watching as she spoke. "A badge is not a crown," she said, her voice carrying through the silent chamber. "It's not armor against accountability or a license for oppression. It's a symbol of service, a promise of protection, a commitment to justice. When someone betrays that symbolism, they betray not just their victims, but every honorable officer who has worn a badge with integrity." She paused. Looking at the faces in the gallery, Linda and Michael Mercer were there, the boy having asked to attend to see the woman who saved him. Sergeant Daniel Mercer thought his badge made him untouchable. He discovered that in America, no one is untouchable. Not corrupt cops, not terrorists with badges, not conspirators who wrap themselves in false patriotism. The Constitution protects all of us, and it holds all of us accountable. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. 6 months later, Adrienne was back at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, returning to her regular duties. The medal ceremony had been General Thompson's idea, a formal recognition of her service, not in a foreign battlefield, but on American soil. As the Secretary of Defense pinned the Distinguished Service Medal on her uniform, he spoke words that would be remembered. Lieutenant Colonel Wallace faced an enemy that wore our own uniforms, that claimed our own flag, that perverted our own values. Her courage exposed not just corruption, but terrorism hiding behind the thin blue line. She reminded us that real strength isn't about power over others, it's about the courage to stand up for others, especially when standing up is dangerous. The ceremony was attended by hundreds, including the constitutional cops, who'd risked their careers to expose corruption, the prosecutors who'd pursued justice despite death threats, and the judges who'd refused to be intimidated. Master Sergeant Rebecca Hayes, now walking with a prosthetic leg, saluted from her wheelchair. Officer Timothy Park, promoted to detective for his role in exposing the conspiracy, stood in his dress uniform. Even William Mercer attended, the elderly former chief, having become an advocate for police reform. But perhaps the most poignant moment came when Michael Mercer, now 11, approached Adrienne after the ceremony. He was holding a letter, his hands shaking slightly. "Colonel Wallace," he said, his young voice steady despite his nerves. "My dad asked me to give this to you. He said you'd understand." The letter, written in Daniel Mercer's hand from federal prison, was simple. "Colonel Wallace, every day I wake up in this cell, I think about that night on the highway. I thought my badge made me untouchable, above the law, beyond consequences. You taught me otherwise, not through violence or vengeance, but through unwavering adherence to the very principles I'd abandoned. My son lives free because of you. He has a chance to become something better than me because of you. There is no forgiveness for what I've done, but there is gratitude for what you've shown, that real authority comes from service, not domination. You asked me once what made me think I was untouchable. The answer was my badge. But badges don't make us untouchable. They make us responsible. I forgot that. You never did. With respect, I don't deserve Daniel Mercer." Adrienne folded the letter carefully and looked at Michael. Your father is learning what real strength means. It's not too late for him to become someone you can be proud of." As the sun set over the base, Adrienne stood with her daughter Sarah, who'd flown in from Germany for the ceremony. They watched the flag-lowering ceremony, a daily ritual that had taken on new meaning. "You know what the real victory was, Mom?" Sarah asked. "What's that?" "You proved that the system works when good people refuse to let it be corrupted. You proved that one person standing up can inspire hundreds to stand with them. You proved that badges don't make people untouchable, accountability does." That night, as Adrienne returned to her quarters, she found thousands of messages waiting from police officers, thanking her for helping clean up their profession. From abuse victims, finding courage in her example. From citizens who'd regained faith in justice. But the one that meant the most came from a young police officer in Texas. "Colonel Wallace, I joined the force to make a difference, but I was losing faith watching the corruption around me. Your courage reminded me why I put on this badge. Today, I reported my sergeant for abuse of power. It's terrifying, but you showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite the fear. Thank you for showing us the way." The badge that Daniel Mercer had thought made him untouchable had become his downfall. But more importantly, the courage of one woman had proven that in America, justice might be delayed, but never denied when good people refuse to accept corruption. As Adrienne looked at her uniform hanging in the closet medals, gleaming in the lamplight, she thought about power, about service, about the thin line between protector and predator. She'd walked that line in combat zones across the world, but the most important battle she'd ever fought had been on a rain-soaked Ohio highway, armed with nothing but integrity and the determination that no one, absolutely no one, was untouchable under the law. 2 years had passed since the medal ceremony, when Adrienne received the call that would shatter the peace she'd finally found. She was teaching a leadership seminar at the Air Force Academy when her phone buzzed with an emergency alert from General Thompson. "Adrienne, Daniel Mercer is dead. Murdered in federal prison 3 hours ago. But that's not why I'm calling. We intercepted communications suggesting you're next." The coffee cup in Adrienne's hand trembled for just a moment before her training kicked in. She set it down carefully, excused herself from the seminar, and stepped into the hallway, where 2 Air Force Security Forces personnel were already waiting. "How?" she asked simply. "Shanked in the prison library." "But Adrienne, he was trying to warn us. Guards found papers hidden in his cell, detailed plans about something called Phoenix Rising. The Patriot Guard isn't dead. They've reorganized, and they're coming for everyone involved in bringing them down." The first mini-climax struck when Adrienne realized the date. It was November 15th, exactly 3 years to the day since that traffic stop on the rain-soaked Ohio highway. This wasn't random. It was orchestrated. As her security detail escorted her to a secure location on base, Adrienne's mind raced through the implications. Daniel Mercer had been cooperating with authorities providing intelligence about remaining Patriot Guard cells. His murder meant someone inside the federal system had given the order someone high enough to orchestrate a hit in maximum security. The secure briefing room at Peterson Air Force Base was already crowded when she arrived. Agent Torres was there, looking older, wearier, her auburn hair now streaked with premature gray from 3 years of hunting domestic terrorists. Marcus Whitman participated via secure video link from Washington, where he now served as Deputy Attorney General. "Phoenix Rising is their resurrection plan," Torres explained, spreading documents across the table. "They've spent 3 years underground recruiting from military law enforcement and now Silicon Valley. They've got tech capabilities we didn't have to face before." The first twist arrived when Torres revealed who was leading Phoenix Rising: Charlotte Mercer, Daniel's younger sister, a former NSA analyst who'd gone dark after her brother's conviction. She'd used her intelligence training to transform the Patriot Guard from a group of corrupt cops into a sophisticated terrorist network with cyber warfare capabilities. She blames Colonel Wallace for destroying her family, Torres said. Daniel's imprisonment, their father's death from a heart attack during the trial, Frank's life sentence. She's turned it all into a crusade for vengeance. The screen flickered to life, showing Charlotte Mercer's face, sharp features, intelligent eyes, and cold determination that reminded Adrienne uncomfortably of Daniel's expression during that traffic stop. But where Daniel had been driven by base prejudice and power, Charlotte appeared motivated by calculated revenge. The second mini-climax erupted when the base's alert sirens began wailing. The secure facility systems had been breached not physically, but digitally. Every screen in the room suddenly displayed the same message. The colonel thought a badge couldn't make someone untouchable. Let's see if her uniform can save her now. Base cybersecurity worked frantically to regain control as the lights flickered and electronic locks began cycling randomly. Charlotte Mercer had announced her presence with a demonstration of power that Daniel could never have imagined. She's not just targeting you, Torres said, as emergency lighting kicked in. Every constitutional cop, every prosecutor, every witness who testified, they're all getting similar messages. But you're the primary target. You're the symbol she needs to destroy. The second twist came when young Michael Mercer's face appeared on the news monitors. Now 13, he was standing at a podium at his middle school, but something was wrong. His eyes were dilated, his movements stilted. My father was a hero murdered by a corrupt system, he said in a monotone voice. Colonel Wallace destroyed my family. Justice requires balance. Balance requires sacrifice. Linda Mercer's terrified voice came through Torres's phone. They took him 3 days ago. Said they were from child services. Had paperwork. They've brainwashed him. Done something to my baby. Adrienne felt her heart clench. The boy she'd saved was now being weaponized against her. Charlotte wasn't just seeking revenge. She was corrupting the very child Adrienne had risked everything to protect. The third mini-climax struck when Officer Timothy Park, now Detective Park, called with urgent intelligence. Colonel, I've been monitoring dark web chatter. Phoenix Rising has infiltrated military contractors. They have access to weapons, vehicles, even drones. They're planning something they call the Reckoning Day. Bruh. Park's investigation revealed that Charlotte had spent 3 years building a network of sympathizers, people who felt the government had overreached in destroying the Patriot Guard. She'd recruited from malicious sovereign citizen movements and, most disturbingly, from within the military itself. We have at least 4 active duty personnel at Wright-Patterson who've been flagged as possible Phoenix Rising assets, General Thompson reported. We're moving to detain them, but Charlotte timed this perfectly. Half our security forces are deployed overseas. The third twist arrived with devastating impact. The detained military personnel were clean. They'd been decoys, their suspicious behavior deliberately orchestrated to draw attention. While security focused on them, the real infiltrators acted. Master Sergeant Rebecca Hayes, still recovering at Walter Reed from additional surgeries, called with a shaking voice. Colonel, they were here. Phoenix Rising. They tried to inject me with something, said it was medication. A nurse stopped them, but 3 other veterans in my ward. They're in comas. Whatever they were injected with, it was meant for anyone who'd testified in the original trial. The pattern became clear. This wasn't just an assassination plot. It was a systematic purge of everyone who'd stood against the Patriot Guard. But Charlotte had learned from her brother's crude methods. She was using precision technology and psychological warfare. The fourth mini-climax erupted when Adrienne received a personal message on her military phone, a number that should have been impossible to access. Charlotte Mercer's voice was calm, educated, coldly rational. Colonel Wallace, You have 48 hours to publicly admit that you fabricated evidence against my brother, that you orchestrated a conspiracy to destroy innocent law enforcement officers. Recant your testimony, resign your commission in disgrace and disappear. Otherwise, everyone you've ever saved, everyone who's ever helped you, will suffer for your pride. Ms. Mercer, Adrienne replied steadily, your brother was guilty. He admitted as much. He died trying to make amends. Don't dishonor his memory with this madness. Charlotte's laugh was chilling. His memory? He died a broken man in a cage abandoned by the very system he served. You did that. You made him weak, made him betray everything he believed. His death is on your hands, and you will answer for it. The fourth twist came when Marcus Whitman discovered something in the legal databases. Charlotte hadn't just been planning revenge. She'd been legally maneuvering for 3 years. Shell companies had been buying up properties around every location significant to the original case. The courthouse, the stretch of highway where the stop occurred, even the hotel where Adrienne had stayed. She owns them all through proxies, Marcus explained. And here's the terrifying part. Each property has been modified. Building permits show extensive renovations that look more like fortifications. She's creating a battlefield on her terms. General Thompson made a command decision. We're moving you to NORAD. Complete isolation, military protection, until we can neutralize this threat. But as Adrienne's convoy prepared to leave Peterson Air Force Base, the fifth mini-climax struck. Every military vehicle simultaneously lost power engines dead, electronics fried. An electromagnetic pulse, localized and precise, had disabled them without affecting the surrounding city. Charlotte's voice came through on battery-powered emergency radios. Did you think I spent 3 years at NSA without learning anything? Your military technology is impressive, Colonel. But it's also vulnerable. Your vehicles won't work. Your communications are compromised. Your weapons are electronically locked. You're as helpless as my brother was when you destroyed him. Adrienne stepped out of the dead vehicle, her security detail forming a protective circle with whatever non-electronic weapons they could find. She looked at the mountains surrounding Colorado Springs and made a decision that surprised everyone. I'm done running. She wants me. Tell her to meet me where it all started. That stretch of highway in Ohio, 1 week from today. Let's end this where Daniel started it. The fifth twist revealed itself when Linda Mercer called with desperate news. Michael had escaped from Charlotte's compound, but he'd been drugged with something that was slowly killing him. The only antidote was with Charlotte, and she would only provide it if Adrienne came to Ohio alone. She's insane, Linda sobbed. She told Michael that his father was a hero, that you're the villain. She's poisoned his mind and now his body. Please, Colonel, I know I have no right to ask, but save him again. Save my boy. The stakes had escalated beyond personal vengeance. Charlotte was forcing Adrienne to choose between her own safety and the life of the child she'd once saved. But the choice was no choice at all for someone who'd spent a lifetime protecting others. The sixth mini-climax arrived when the constitutional cops emerged from the shadows they'd been forced into. Detective Park led 12 officers who'd been secretly investigating Phoenix Rising, and they'd discovered something crucial. Charlotte has a weakness, Park reported. She's brilliant, but unstable. Our psychological profile shows she's developed an obsession with parallels with symbolic justice. Everything she does mirrors something from the original case. If we can predict the pattern, we can stop her. The pattern was intricate but visible once identified. 3 years since the traffic stop. 3 phases of attack. Cyber-chemical psychological. 3 demands: confession, resignation, disappearance. Everything in threes, like a twisted homage to the 3 years her brother had survived in prison. The 7th mini-climax struck when Agent Torres uncovered the most disturbing element of Phoenix Rising. Charlotte had recruited families of every criminal convicted because of the Patriot Guard investigation. She'd weaponized their grief, their anger, their desire for revenge into a small army of motivated terrorists. She's got at least 200 active members, Torres reported. They call themselves the Vindicated. They believe the entire justice system is corrupt and that violence is the only solution. The week passed in a blur of preparations. Adrienne trained with a special operations team, preparing for every contingency Charlotte might have planned. But she also spent time writing letters to her daughter Sarah, to the families of those she'd served with, to the people who'd stood with her against corruption. The night before leaving for Ohio, Adrienne stood in the base chapel, not praying, but thinking. General Thompson found her there. "You don't have to do this," the general said. "We can find another way. She has that boy Patricia, Michael Mercer. I saved him once from his uncle's extremism. I won't let him die from his aunt's revenge. Besides, this ends when someone stops running from these people and faces them. It could be a trap. It probably is a trap." Adrienne smiled grimly. "In Afghanistan, we learned that sometimes the only way to spring a trap is to walk into it with your eyes open." The 8th mini-climax erupted the morning of departure, when news broke that Phoenix Rising had simultaneously hacked every major news network. Charlotte Mercer's face appeared on millions of screens as she delivered what she called the Truth Manifesto. 3 years ago, a military officer conspired with federal authorities to destroy American law enforcement. My brother Daniel Mercer was framed, tortured into false confession, and murdered in custody. Today, justice returns to that highway where it all began. Today, Colonel Adrienne Wallace will face trial by the people she betrayed. The broadcast showed the stretch of Ohio highway transformed into a fortified compound. Charlotte had used her shell companies to build what looked like a medieval fortress around the site of the original traffic stop. Walls, towers, and hundreds of Phoenix Rising members armed with military-grade weapons. The 8th twist came when military intelligence decrypted communications, revealing Charlotte's true plan. She didn't just want to kill Adrienne. She wanted to stage a public execution broadcast globally, turning Adrienne's death into a rallying cry for anti-government extremists worldwide. "She's created a martyrdom scenario," General Thompson explained. "If we assault the compound, civilian casualties are inevitable. She's positioned media cameras to capture everything. Any aggressive action makes us look like the oppressors she claims we are." But Adrienne had faced similar scenarios in Afghanistan, where extremists used human shields and media manipulation. She knew the playbook and had developed her own strategy. "I'm not going in alone," she said. "I'm going with witnesses. Linda and Michael Mercer, if Michael is strong enough, the constitutional cops, veterans who stood with me, media who covered the original trial. Charlotte wants a public trial. She'll get one, but not the kind she expects." The journey to Ohio became a pilgrimage of sorts. As news spread that Adrienne was returning to face Charlotte, supporters began gathering along the route. Veterans, law enforcement officers who believed in accountability, civilians who'd followed the case, they formed an informal convoy that grew with each mile. The 9th mini-climax struck when they reached the outskirts of Columbus. The FBI had established a perimeter around Charlotte's compound, but they couldn't act without risking the hostages Charlotte had taken, judges, prosecutors, and police officers who'd participated in the original trial. Through binoculars, Adrienne could see the stretch of highway where it had all began. Charlotte had built her fortress around it, but she'd preserved the exact spot where Daniel had pulled Adrienne over, marking it with a memorial that read, "Here began the injustice that destroyed American heroes." Charlotte's voice boomed through loudspeakers. "Colonel Wallace, you came. How noble, how predictable. Enter alone, or watch everyone inside die. But Adrienne had anticipated this. She activated a microphone that broadcast to the media cameras surrounding the compound and to the Phoenix Rising members inside. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace, and I'm here to face your accusations, but not in secret, not in shadow. If Charlotte Mercer wants justice, let it be public. Let everyone hear the truth, all of it." The ninth twist revealed itself when someone unexpected emerged from the compound. William Mercer, Daniel's father, now 76, and walking with difficulty, had been kidnapped by Charlotte, but refused to support her cause. "Charlotte, stop this madness," he called out, his voice amplified by the media microphones. "I lost my son to his own corruption. Don't dishonor his memory by becoming the very evil he finally recognized in himself. Daniel died trying to redeem himself. He was murdered because he was helping expose the remaining extremists. You're not avenging him, you're betraying his final wish for redemption." Charlotte appeared on the compound's walls, her face twisted with rage. "You're senile, old man. Daniel was weak, broken by this woman's manipulation. I'm not weak. I'm not broken. I'm justice incarnate." The 10th mini-climax arrived when Michael Mercer, despite being weakened by the poison in his system, stood up beside Adrienne. The 13-year-old's voice was weak but clear as he addressed his aunt. "Aunt Charlotte, Colonel Wallace saved me. When Dad's friends kidnapped me, when they were going to kill me, she led the rescue. Dad made mistakes, big ones, but he admitted them. He tried to make things right. You're not honoring him. You're becoming everything he regretted being." Charlotte's composure cracked. "They've brainwashed you, Michael. Made you forget what they did to our family." "No," Michael said firmly. "You drugged me, tried to make me hate someone who saved my life. Dad wrote me letters from prison. Want to know what he said? He said Colonel Wallace showed him what real strength was, standing for what's right, even when it costs you everything." The 10th twist came when Phoenix Rising members began laying down their weapons. Charlotte's carefully constructed narrative was crumbling as the truth emerged from the very family she claimed to be avenging. One of her lieutenants, a former Marine named Tommy Rodriguez, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I joined because I thought we were fighting corruption. But this isn't fighting corruption. This is becoming it. That kid is dying from poison you gave him. That old man is your father's dad. This isn't justice." Charlotte pulled a detonator from her vest. "If you won't stand with me, you'll all burn together. This entire compound is rigged with explosives. The colonel, the traitors, everyone dies together." But Adrienne had one more card to play. She pulled out a tablet showing a live feed from inside the compound. "Your explosives have been neutralized, Charlotte. While you were focused on me, special operations teams infiltrated your compound through the very tunnels you built. Every bomb, every weapon, every trap, all disabled."
The video showed Special Forces soldiers emerging from hidden positions throughout the compound. Phoenix Rising members surrendering without resistance, hostages being evacuated to safety. Charlotte stood alone on the wall, the detonator useless in her hand. "You destroyed everything," she screamed at Adrienne. "My family, my brother, everything." "No," Adrienne replied firmly. "Your brother destroyed himself through corruption and abuse of power. But he found redemption in his final days, helping us stop other extremists. He died a better man than he lived. You're the one dishonoring his memory by perpetuating the very hatred he renounced." Charlotte pulled a pistol, aiming it at Adrienne. The range was long, but not impossible. Everyone tensed, weapons were raised, but Adrienne held up her hand, stopping anyone from firing. "Go ahead, Charlotte. Kill me on live television in front of your nephew, in front of your father.
Prove that you're exactly the terrorist we've said you are. Or drop the weapon, face justice with dignity, and maybe find the redemption your brother discovered." For a long moment, Charlotte stood frozen, the gun wavering. Then Michael spoke again, his young voice cutting through the tension. "Aunt Charlotte, please. I don't want to lose any more family. Dad's gone. Don't make me watch you die too." The gun fell from Charlotte's hand, clattering on the concrete. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing the weight of 3 years of hatred and planning finally breaking her. As federal agents took Charlotte into custody, Adrienne administered the antidote to Michael, saving his life for the second time. The boy hugged her with weakening arms, whispering, "Thank you for not giving up on my family." The compound that Charlotte had built as a fortress of revenge became a symbol of reconciliation. The memorial she'd erected to her brother was replaced with a different marker. Here, corruption was exposed. Here, justice prevailed. Here, Americans stood together against extremism, regardless of uniform. During Charlotte's trial, which began 3 months later, Adrienne testified not as a victim, but as a voice for understanding. Charlotte Mercer was consumed by grief and manipulated that grief into hatred. Her brother's story became distorted in her mind until she could no longer see the truth that Daniel himself had recognized his wrongs and sought redemption. She's responsible for her actions, but she's also a casualty of the very extremism her brother once embodied. Charlotte received life in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 25 years, a recognition that revenge and justice were not the same thing. 6 months after Charlotte's conviction, Adrienne stood once again on that stretch of Ohio highway. But this time, she wasn't alone. Michael Mercer stood beside her now, healthy, and participating in a youth leadership program she'd helped establish. Linda Mercer was there too, having become an advocate for families torn apart by extremism. Detective Timothy Park had brought the Constitutional Cops, now an official oversight organization within law enforcement. Agent Torres represented the FBI's new domestic terrorism task force. Marcus Whitman had flown in from Washington, where he continued fighting corruption at the highest levels. Even William Mercer attended the elderly man, having become an unlikely ally in the fight for police reform. "My son lost his way," he said to the gathered crowd. "My granddaughter lost herself to revenge. But from their failures, we can build something better, a system where badges mean service, not supremacy." Adrienne addressed the crowd that had gathered for the dedication of a new training facility built on the site of Charlotte's compound. It would teach de-escalation constitutional rights and the true meaning of service to both military and law enforcement personnel. 5 years ago on this spot, a traffic stop went wrong because someone believed a badge made them untouchable. That single moment of abuse of power sparked a chain of events that exposed corruption, extremism, and terrorism hiding within our institutions. But it also revealed something more powerful, the courage of ordinary people to stand against injustice. She looked at Michael Mercer, who would speak next about forgiveness and redemption. "We've learned that badges don't make anyone untouchable, but we've also learned that courage, integrity, and justice working together are truly unstoppable." As the sun set over Ohio, casting long shadows across the highway where it all began, Adrienne thought about the journey from that rainy night to this moment of reconciliation. The badge that Daniel Mercer had thought made him untouchable had led to his downfall. The revenge Charlotte sought had consumed her, but from their failures had risen something stronger, a commitment to justice that transcended uniforms, badges, and personal vendettas. Michael Mercer took the podium, his young voice strong as he began to speak. "My father thought his badge made him untouchable. My aunt thought revenge would bring justice. They were both wrong. But Colonel Wallace taught me something different. Real strength isn't about power over others. It's about the courage to protect others, even those who've wronged you." The crowd applauded as the American flag was raised over the new facility. It would train a new generation of protectors, people who understood that true authority came not from badges or ranks, but from service, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Adrienne Wallace had faced down corruption, survived terrorism, and prevented revenge from consuming another generation. She'd proven that one person standing up for what's right could indeed change everything. The badge hadn't made Daniel Mercer untouchable, but Adrienne's integrity had made justice unstoppable. As she walked away from the ceremony, Adrienne received a text from her daughter Sarah, now a major serving in Germany. "Proud of you, Mom. You didn't just win a case or stop terrorists. You broke the cycle of hatred. You showed them all what real strength looks like." Adrienne smiled, looking back one last time at the highway, where a routine traffic stop had changed everything. The badge doesn't make anyone untouchable, she thought. But truth, courage, and justice, those are bulletproof.